Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi. Let's light up the darkness. Oh, wait a minute. Let's reset. Who's in the house on a Thursday while my computer catches up? Bum, bum, bum. Sharon in New Jersey, Shandor in the Bronx, Bill in mid-Missouri, Bella in Florida, Melissa in Great Lake, Nancy, North Carolina, Joe in the Inland Empire, Frank in San Pedro, Marjorie in Georgia, Ella in Southern California, Lanit in Silver Spring, Spencer in Connecticut. Prayers, please, for my brother evacuated from the fires in Camarillo. May your brother and his whole family and everyone who was evacuated be safe. Say amen. And Alan in New York City. Welcome, everybody. Our daf is page 134 here in Tractate Bava Basra, 23rd volume of the Talmud. Something changed. Let's see. My light's a little closer to me, making me a little too bright. 23rd volume of the Talmud. We are in chapter 8, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 7, which, God willing, we're going to complete tonight. So yesterday we were talking about the idea that a father wanted to disinherit his kids because they weren't behaving properly. And it seemed a divided opinion among the sages. Is it appropriate to disinherit these kids who are not acting properly? And then to illustrate the point, we had this story of Yonasan ben Uzziel, who was a student of Hillel. And there was a wealthy man who disinherited his son because he wasn't behaving properly. And so rather than give the money to his son, he gave it to Yonasan ben Uzziel, who was a great sage in his own right. And what did Yonasan do? He split the money in thirds. He kept a third for himself and for his needs. He consecrated a third as a gift to the Holy Temple, which was standing at that time, the Second Temple. And the last third he gave to the heirs, to the sons of this man who wanted to disinherit them. So Hillel's contemporary, Shammai, the great Shammai, heard about this and set off, walking in a hurry, and arrived at the home of Yonasan ben Uzziel with his staff and his carrying bag in hand, and said, "Hey, you can't do that. What are you doing? The father gave you that money because he didn't want it to go to his sons. So when you gave it to his sons, first of all, you violated the will of the father. And second, perhaps that means that you give up your whole inheritance and you have to give all of it back. And you don't get to keep any of it." This is something I heard another Daf Yomi teacher talking about. But Yonasan ben Uzziel had the answer. He said, "The father did not give it to me, saying you can keep it if you don't give any to my son. The father gave it to me. It was a flat-out gift. So are you saying, Shammai, that what I consecrated to the temple, you can take back? And anything that I kept for myself and sold to someone else, you can take it back because it wasn't mine to consecrate or to sell or to give away as I wish?" And Shammai said, well, no. The gift had no conditions, so what you consecrated is consecrated. He said, well, if the gift had no conditions and it was mine to consecrate, then it was also mine to give to this man's sons, whether or not the father wanted to disinherit them. Once it was mine, I could do with it what I want, and I wanted to give some of it back to the man's sons. And Shammai said, what can I say? You're right. Now the Gemara continues. Apropos Jonas, and so the basic principle that we took from this section was if somebody gives you a gift, so if there's a condition on it, like you have to do something with it, then it's not a gift. It's more like a loan. But if it's a flat out gift where you have the ability to consecrate it, to the Holy Temple because there's no strings attached to it, then it is a gift, right? So the test of if somebody has given you a gift or not, a full gift that you could do what you want with it, is do you have the right to consecrate it? And if you do, then it was a full gift. Okay, we are about halfway down, a little less than halfway, page 134a. So apropos Yonasan ben Uzziel, now that we're talking about Yonasan ben Uzziel, the Gemara cites that the sages taught. Hillel the elder, the great Hillel, right, the contemporary of Shammai, Hillel who said, where there is no man, strive to be a man. Hillel who said, do not say something that is not easily understood in the hopes that it will ultimately be understood, because quite likely it will never be understood. Speak clearly. The great Hillel the elder. Hillel the elder had 80 students. 30 of them were sufficiently worthy that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, should rest upon them as it did upon Moses, our teacher. Okay? Hillel had 80 students. 30 of them were worthy to have the kind of relationship that Moses had with God. They were as worthy as Moses. Why did the Shekhinah not rest on them if they were so worthy? I don't know if it says it here, but what I heard, I don't think it says it here. But the reason is because the generation that they lived in was not worthy to have the divine presence so revealed as it was in the time of Moses. Indeed, we're talking about a generation late in the Second Temple period. The spiritual level of the nation had fallen and fallen and fallen and fallen. And they're not that far away, tragically, from the end of the Second Temple period, when the Second Temple would be destroyed, and we're still in that exile with the temple missing from our midst for almost 2,000 years. So, at any rate, that's how worthy these students were. 30 of them were sufficiently worthy that the divine presence should rest upon them as it did on Moses, our teacher. The next 30 of them were sufficiently worthy that the sun should stand still for them as it did for Yehoshua ben Nun. Joshua ben Nun, the successor to Moses, who led the children of Israel into the promised land. So that's pretty high level. And 20 were on an intermediate level between the other two. Okay, so the students, now maybe there's a bit of hyperbole here, but it's not on its face hyperbolic. They're just saying that the students of Hillel were of such a lofty spiritual stature that on an individual basis, they were all somewhere between. They were either at the level of Moses or the level of Joshua or somewhere in between. And the greatest of all the students that were all on this unbelievable level, the greatest of all of them was Yonasan ben Uzziel. And the least of them was Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. Okay, who was Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai? He was one of the greatest rabbis in Jewish history, the one who basically saved Judaism at the fall of the Second Temple. He's the one that got out and had a negotiation with the Roman general and said, look, I get it. You're going to destroy Jerusalem and the Holy Temple, but give me Yavne and its sages. In other words, let me save the spiritual leaders of my people so that we can figure out what Judaism is going to look like in the absence of the Holy Temple and bringing the sacrifices and making the pilgrimages, etc. Without this center to the religion, what is Judaism going to be like? We're going to have to figure that out. And that's, what the big project was in the aftermath of the destruction. And that was led by Yohanan ben Zakkai and Rabban Gamliel. So the least of the students of Hillel, of those 80 students, was Yohanan ben Zakkai. That's to tell you what an incredible stature they all were. And the greatest of them was Yonasan ben Uzziel. So you can imagine what he was like. The sages said about Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai that he did not neglect Bible and Mishna, Talmud, halachos, and agados, right? So the laws, the agadot, which are, kind of the more story-oriented teachings in the Talmud and in the Midrash, but also kind of expansive teachings about the law, so he understood the law better. The minutiae of the Torah and the minutiae of the scribes, and the hermeneutical principles of the Torah with regard to Kal V'chomer inferences and Gezerah Shava and the calculation of the seasons and the numerical values of the Hebrew letters and parables of launderers, which are folk tales that can be used to explain the Torah, and the parables of foxes. And in addition, he did not neglect esoteric matters, including the conversation of demons, right? The language of demons. Why would a sage need to know that? Because to do an exorcism, right? If somebody has a demonic possession, which is something that could happen. So if a sage is brought in, to do an exorcism, he could do that. And the conversation of palm trees and the conversation of ministering angels, and more generally, a great matter and a small matter. And what's a great matter and a small matter? A great matter is referring to the secrets of the design of the chariot, meaning mystical, Jewish mysticism. And it's referred to as Merkava mysticism, the divine chariot, as referenced in Ezekiel chapter 1. It's just called the workings of the chariot, but it means Jewish mysticism. And the conduct of the transcendent universe. That's a great matter. And a small matter is, for example, the laws that were ultimately formulated in the framework of the discussions of Abaye and Rava. So, which is to say that Yohanan ben Zakkai was a gifted sage who had expertise in basically every area of Jewish law and Jewish wisdom and Jewish scripture and Jewish history. He did not neglect any of these disciplines so as to fulfill that which is stated, quote, that I may cause those that love me to inherit substance and that I may fill their treasuries. Proverbs 8, verse 21. As Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai was filled with the disciplines of Torah and wisdom. And he was the least of the 80 students of Hillel. And the Gemara adds, and if the least of them was so prolific, the greatest of them was all the more so prolific. And the Gemara relates that the sages said of Yonasan ben Uzziel, the greatest of Hillel's students, that when he would sit and engage in Torah study, the sanctity that he generated was so intense that any bird that would fly over him would be burned. It's funny. I read that, quite a while ago during my first journey through the Talmud, and I was struck by that image, right? A sage that is, so intensely involved in learning and teaching Torah that there's some kind of a, like a heat and a light that is rising from him, so much so that it's dangerous for a bird to fly overhead. I just was struck by that image. I remembered it. But it was, just some kind of an image, from the Talmud that I, transferred to my imagination. I couldn't imagine something like that in the real world. And then I learned about this solar field, right? Thermal solar energy field called Ivanpah, which you pass on the road between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. It's near the Nevada border. And where there are these massive towers and 100,000 heliostats shining there, reflecting the sunlight at these towers and superheating, this conductor liquid that is then used to run steam turbines and generate electricity. Beautiful plant generating clean energy, but it's producing so much heat coming off those mirrors that are reflecting up to the towers that many birds get burned in that heat field above these mirrors in this thermal solar plant. Exactly like this description of what was going on above Yonasan ben Uzziel. Obviously, the difference is one thing is to shine a mirror, 100,000 large mirrors and create heat that way, and it's another thing to create that much heat through the intensity of your devotion to God and revealing these mystical secrets of the universe through that careful, deep, and extensive study. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 7 here in chapter 8 of Tractate Bava Basra. Now, Mishnah number 8 of chapter 8. One who says, "This is my son," is deemed credible. You believe a father who says, "This man is my son." One who says, "This is my brother," is not deemed credible with regard to his other brother's obligation to share the inheritance with the subject of his statement. In other words, if he says, I am one of 3 brothers, right? There's 3 of us, and so an estate is coming to us, and the oldest one is going to get the double portion, and the other 2 of us are going to get single portions. But hold on a second, my 2 brothers. You guys don't know this, but we have a 4th brother. And here he is. This is our 4th brother. And these guys are like, we never heard of him. We don't know about him. What are you talking about? Right? So this 3rd brother is not credible. He's not deemed credible to introduce a new brother to the family and say, this is our brother, which is going to affect the inheritance of the other brothers. Why? Why is he not deemed credible? Well, why haven't those brothers heard of this new brother? When one claims that this man is his brother, this claim is accepted with regard to the speaker's own portion, and the man in question takes a share of their father's inheritance with him, i.e. from his portion. In other words, if I come and say to my 2 brothers, hey, this other guy's our brother also, and he's going to share in the inheritance. So these guys don't have to give up any portion of their inheritance. But I do. Since I said he's a brother, I'm going to split my portion with him. But those guys don't have to split anything, unless they accept the story of how this guy's our brother. But if it's just, my testimony, my word, with no other witnesses, no other evidence, they don't have to accept it. But since I made the claim, I have to share my part of the inheritance with him. If the man in question, this new guy, the new brother that I'm bringing, if the man in question dies, the property that he received from the father's inheritance shall return to its place, i.e. to the possession of the brother, me, who testified on his behalf, from whose portion he received a share. Those guys didn't want to share their portions with him, so now that he dies, his portion comes back to me. It doesn't get split with them also. If property came into the man in question's possession from somewhere else, other than from the father, and the man in question died, then all of the brothers of the one who testified shall inherit with the one who testified, as according to his claim, they too are heirs of the deceased. Right? So if this guy that I said is our brother acquired not only some property from our father, but also some other property, and then he died, well, according to me, he's our brother. So if he had no children, we as brothers inherit. I'm saying he's our full brother. So that other property, it gets split between me and my other 2 brothers, because according to my claim, he's our full brother. That, or at least our paternal brother, which would matter for inheritance. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Mishnah teaches that one who says, "This is my son," is deemed credible. So with regard to what law is this stated? Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says it is stated with regard to inheriting from him, i.e., the son inherits from the speaker. And with regard to rendering his wife exempt from yibum, right? So when a man dies childless, he has no children, and he leaves a widow, and he also has a brother, so then the brother and the widow have the option to marry, And if they do, then their first child will be considered the heir of the brother who died, and any other children would be their own children and heirs of the surviving brother. If they choose not to marry, then they perform the ceremony of chalitza, and then they go their separate ways, and she can marry anyone she wants. But this is only the case when a man dies having had no children. If he had children, even if the children predeceased him, the wife is not subject to yibum. She doesn't qualify for yibum. So, Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, it is stated that a man is deemed credible when he says that this is my son. It is stated with regard to inheriting from him. Wait a minute, where am I? With regard to what law is this stated? Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says it is stated with regard to inheriting from him. It is stated with regard to inheriting from him, i.e. the son inherits from the speaker. In other words, if I say this is my son, then he will inherit from me. And with regard to rendering his wife exempt from yibum, because he claims that the person in question is his son, his wife is not required to enter into yibum, levirate marriage, after his death because he has a child. Now, page 134b. The Gemara asks, isn't it obvious that his claim is deemed credible with regard to someone inheriting from him? Since he could have given this person his property as a gift, it need not be stated that his claim is accepted with regard to his inheritance. And the Gemara responds, right? In other words, if I'm saying this is my son and he's going to inherit from me, why would anybody disbelieve me? I have the option, if I want, to just gift all my property to this person that I'm saying is my son. Since I have that option, I'm deemed credible to say he is my son and he can inherit from me. And the Gemara responds, it was nevertheless necessary for the Mishnah to state that his claim is deemed credible with regard to rendering his wife exempt from yibum, despite the fact that it is not in his power to render her exempt, but the law of inheritance is not a novelty. So the Gemara asks, well, we already learned this in a Mishnah, Tractate Kiddushin as well. One who said at the time of his death, I have children, he is deemed credible, and his wife is thereby exempt from yibum. Right? If on his deathbed he says, listen, my wife, you don't know this, my family, you don't know this, my townspeople, you don't know this, but before I moved to this town and married my wife, I was married briefly and I had a child, and I don't know where that child is, but I had a child. Right? So that child maybe can't inherit because no one knows where he is. And maybe he's dead. And maybe he even says, I had a child and he died. But what he just did is he rendered his wife exempt from yibum. She now no longer has the option to marry his brother. Yibum is off the table because this man had a son, even if he says that on his deathbed. So we learn this, right? One who said at the time of his death, I have children, he is deemed credible, and his wife is thereby exempt from yibum. If he said, I have brothers, and his wife therefore must enter yibum, he is not deemed credible, right? So different situation. He's on his deathbed, and no one is aware that he has a brother. They know that he hasn't had any children and that he has a wife. So, once he dies, his wife is going to be a widow and she can go ahead and marry anyone she wants. If this guy on his deathbed says, by the way, none of you know this, but I have a brother and he lives in a faraway land, 1 month's journey from here. Then he passes out and he dies. So this is a major problem for the wife, because if he left a brother, she doesn't have to marry that brother, but she does have to perform the chalitza ceremony with him that would render her free to marry someone else. And until she does that, she's not free to marry someone else. So she would be stuck. If this guy claims he has a brother, some long-lost brother, who no one even knows where to find him, and if they even know where to find him, he's a month away, and maybe he's dead, who knows? Maybe they can't get word to him. Maybe they just can't find him. So this would render the widow unable to ever remarry. And perhaps that's why the ruling here is that a man is not deemed credible on his deathbed to say, I have a brother somewhere. He's not deemed credible for that. He's deemed credible to say, I've had a son, so his wife does not have to perform yibum, but he's not deemed credible to say, I have a brother somewhere, which would mean that the wife is stuck until she performs yibum or chalitza. Now the Gemara answers, there in that Mishnah, it is a case where he is not presumed by us to have a brother. Okay, so in other words, we don't have a presumption before he makes this statement one way or the other. Therefore, his wife is already presumed to be exempt from, he is not presumed by us to have a brother. I think what they mean is he is presumed by us to not have a brother. We all have an assumption. We know him. We've known him for years. We never heard about a brother, so we presume that he does not have a brother. So in that situation, if he says he had a brother, he's not deemed credible and the wife is free to remarry. Therefore, his wife is already presumed to be exempt from levirate marriage, and his claim that he has a son merely substantiates this presumption. With respect to his claim that he has a son somewhere, this is a case where he is not presumed by us to have a brother. Interesting. So they don't know about any brother. He says he has a son. Doesn't change anything. They didn't think that she was going to have to perform yibum or chalitza because they weren't aware of any brother. And then when he says he has a son somewhere, okay, it's confirmed, fully confirmed. She has no problem. She can go just remarry whoever she wants. But here, the Mishnah adds a novelty that even if he is presumed to have a brother, his claim that he has a son is accepted and his wife is thereby exempted from levirate marriage. So this would change the situation. He has a brother. They thought she was going to have to perform yibum because he had no kids. Now he says he has a son somewhere. She's off the hook. She can go remarry however she wants. But she cannot marry his brother. Rav Yosef says that Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says. For what reason did the sages say that one who says, this is my son, is deemed credible? Since a husband who says, I divorced my wife, is deemed credible, and his wife is thereby exempt from yibum, he's also deemed credible with regard to the claim that he has a son to excuse her from performing yibum. If she was divorced before he died, there's no yibum. It's only when she's widowed and he never had a child and he leaves a brother that yibum is a possibility. Now, as Rav Yosef forgot some of his Torah knowledge due to an illness, he questioned the accuracy of his own citation of Rav Yehuda. So Rav Yosef said, Master of Abraham, this reasoning makes that which is taught in the Mishnah dependent upon that which is not taught, as the credibility of one who claims, this is my son, is stated in the Mishnah, while the law that a husband's claim that he divorced his wife is accepted. This is the statement of an Amora, a later rabbi, later than the Mishnah, a rabbi of the Gemara, less authority than a rabbi of the Mishnah. So rather, if this explanation was stated, it was stated like this. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, for what reason did the sages say that one who says, this is my son, is deemed credible with regard to rendering his wife exempt from yibum? Since it is in his power to divorce her and thereby render her exempt from levirate marriage, he is deemed credible with regard to this claim as well. In other words, when he's on his deathbed, he could divorce his wife. He could say, draw up, get for me right now a bill of divorce, and and hand it to my wife. I'm divorcing her right now, right? So that causes that after he dies, she doesn't have any kind of yibum obligation and she's free to remarry. She doesn't lose money because whether he dies or divorces her, she still gets her ketubah payment. So this would be something that he's doing for her benefit. And since he has that option to just divorce her, if he says, I have a son, and that produces the same effect, no yibum obligation, so he's believed for that as well. Since he has two options how he can accomplish the same thing, we believe him. Right. And Rav Yosef said, in addition, now that you said that we say that the husband is deemed credible, since he also has the power to divorce her, a husband who says, I divorced my wife, is also deemed credible, since it is in his power to divorce her at any time. Since he has that option, why wouldn't we believe him? When Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said that Rabbi Yohanan says, a husband who says, I have divorced my wife, is not deemed credible. Right? Even though he could divorce her right now if he wants, nevertheless, if he says he already divorced her, we don't believe him. And Rav Sheshes waved his hand disparagingly, as if to say that Rav Yosef's statement that he is deemed credible, since it is in his power to divorce her, is gone due to Rabbi Yochanan's statement. So the Gemara asks, is that so? Did Rabbi Yochanan actually say that? But doesn't Rabbi Chiya bar Avin say that Rabbi Yochanan says, a husband who says, I have divorced my wife, is deemed credible? We believe him. And the Gemara answers, this is not difficult. La kasha. Here in the statement that the husband is not deemed credible, Rabbi Yochanan was referring to a retroactive testimony. For example, in a case where he testified that he divorced her on a certain date, and it is discovered that she engaged in sexual intercourse with another man after that date, his testimony is not accepted concerning whether the man is liable to receive punishment. She is not considered to have been divorced at that time, and this is because it is not in the husband's power to divorce her retroactively. The marriage was on the rocks. They weren't living together. They got divorced at some point, but it turns out that before they got divorced, she committed adultery. Now, this guy, he's no longer married to her anyway. He doesn't want her, to suffer reputational damage. Maybe he feels like, he was in part to blame for where the marriage was. So he says, you know what, listen, I divorced her, before she ever committed that action. The divorce was before that. He's really saying that on her behalf. We don't let him do that, right? We don't let him retroactively change the date of the divorce to get her off the hook. Because even though we're not going to prosecute her for adultery, the guy that committed adultery with her, he has committed a big sin and he's disqualified from serving as a witness in other cases. And we need to know that. By contrast, the statement there where Rabbi Yochanan said that the husband's testimony that he has divorced his wife, where we do believe him, where that testimony is deemed credible, this refers to testimony for the future. For example, where he says that he divorced her on that same day or without specifying a date, in which case his statement is relevant only for the future. Since it was in his power to divorce her at that time, his testimony is deemed credible. If he dies, she is exempt from levirate marriage, and if she engages in sexual intercourse with another man, she is not considered to have committed adultery if it was after the date when he said, we're divorced, we've been divorced. A dilemma was raised before the sages. If the husband said that he divorced his wife on a certain date, as a retroactive testimony, what is the law concerning his testimony being deemed credible and accepted with regard to the future, rendering her divorced from that time onward, despite the fact that his claim is not accepted with regard to the past? If he says, I divorced her last year, and he says this, let's say he says it on January 1st, 1900, and he says, I divorced her on January 1st, 1899, right? We don't accept that retroactive designation. But if, then she is found to have slept with another man in 1901, after the guy made a statement that I've already been divorced with her for a year, and a year after he makes the statement, she sleeps with some guy. Is that considered adultery? Since we don't accept his retroactive statement about they've been divorced a year ago, do we say, but at least as of now, we do accept that they're divorced, and therefore when she's found with another man a year later, that's not adultery? So the dilemma is based on the following fundamental question. Do we divide the husband's statement, accepting that he divorced his wife, inasmuch as she is considered divorced from that time onward, since it is in his power to divorce her now, even though his claim that he divorced her in the past is not accepted? Or do we not divide this statement? And we say instead that his claim is rejected altogether, since his claim concerning the past cannot be accepted. So Rav Mari and Rav Zevid engaged in a dispute with regard to this issue. One says, we divide the husband's statement, and the other one says, we do not divide it. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. So the Gemara asks, well, in what way is this case different from Rava's statement? As Rava says, that if a man says, so-and-so engaged in sexual intercourse with my wife, the husband and another witness combine to have him executed. In other words, the husband can be one of the witnesses, along with another witness, to say, this man committed adultery. We saw it. He committed it. And so he could be subject to the death penalty. Now, the death penalty is not going to really apply because a death penalty requires that the two witnesses said to the person, we're watching you. If you commit that action, you're going to be liable to the death penalty. And then the guy does it immediately. Then he would qualify for the death penalty, and still probably the court would find some way out of it because it was very rare, even when rabbinic courts had the power to impose a death penalty, that it actually happened. And now rabbinic courts don't have that power. But at any rate, the question is it even possible, right? Is it even possible? And the question here is, can we say that when a man commits adultery with another man's wife, can we say that the wife's husband can be one of the witnesses, along with some third person, to say they saw that man commit adultery with the man's wife? And therefore, if it could all be proven, etc., it's a death penalty offense. Does the husband's testimony count against that man? Answer, yes. The husband can be one of the witnesses. He can be one of the witnesses to have that man convicted of adultery. But the husband cannot be one of the witnesses to have his own wife convicted of adultery, because a husband cannot testify against his wife. That's not permitted. Let's keep reading how it says it in the Gemara. As Rava says, that if a man says, so-and-so engaged in sexual intercourse with my wife, the husband and another witness can combine to have him executed, to have him sentenced to death for adultery. The Gemara infers he combines with another witness to have him executed, but not to have her executed. The wife is not sentenced to death based on the testimony, even if they testified that she engaged in sexual intercourse willingly, as a husband is disqualified from bearing witness concerning his wife. So evidently, the husband's testimony is divided. His testimony concerning the man is accepted, even though the testimony concerning his wife's part in the same crime is rejected. So it seems like we can divide the man's testimony. And the Gemara answers, with regard to two separate bodies, we divide the statement. His statement can be divided where we accept his testimony with regard to the wife's lover, but not with regard to the wife, because he's married to the wife and he can't testify against her. But he's telling the same story. It's accepted vis-a-vis the paramour, not vis-a-vis the wife. We accept divided testimony when it pertains to two different people. But with regard to one body, we do not divide it. And that is why one sage holds that a husband's claim that he divorced his wife in the past cannot be divided, so that his claim that he divorced her would be accepted, while his claim as to when he divorced her would be rejected. According to this view, we can't divide his statement with respect to the same wife. Once part of that statement is rejected, the whole claim is rejected, and we don't know that he divorced her until we have more evidence that he divorced her. And that concludes our learning for today. I'm going to go to some questions and comments, and God willing, we'll pick it up tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. Just two questions from Joe. Man on deathbed announces son nobody knows about. So the wife would become the steward of the estate until such time as his child should appear. How would this child prove that she is the child of the man? Great question, right? He just says he has a son. So it becomes a problem. That's exactly right? I mean, so therefore he has an heir. But what he could do at the same time that he's saying, I have a son, therefore she doesn't have to perform yibum, but I gift my estate to her, or to some other of his heirs, and therefore this long-lost son is no longer a factor because he's been disinherited. But the importance of saying that he has this son is that she is now off the hook in terms of Yibum, and she's free to marry whoever she wants to. Joe also says the date of a get is not written in the document. The date of a get is written in the document. But this is a situation where there is no get. There is no other evidence except the man saying that he divorced the wife. That's why we're saying, do we believe him or not? Because we don't have other evidence. And finally, Joe says, wouldn't she need to be present to the court, or to come to the court to get her get, or bring the get to the court? Right. So the question then is, well, he gave her a get. She should have the get. Why doesn't she have the get? Well, maybe she lost the get. Or maybe she's not even here, right? Maybe she died in the meantime. And the question is, when, she slept with this man, was she married or not? Because then this man, then either the man committed adultery or he did not commit adultery. There may not be a get that is available for evidence. There may not be a wife that is available to be a witness, to testify, to tell her story. She just may not be available. She may not be present. She may not be alive. So that's why the law, we would have to determine it in the absence of that further evidence. That's what I've got for us tonight. With God's help, see you tomorrow, Friday time, noon Pacific.